Dr. Cummins, thank you for doing this interview at short notice. As you know, the region is celebrating World Environment Day today under the theme 7 Billion Dreams, One Planet, Consume with Care. And we are aware that there are some unsustainable environmental systems which increase the risk for NCDs. Could you comment on how the region articulates the correlation between health and the environment?
Well, as you know, back in 2007, the region made one of the first in the world proclamations regarding NCD. The heads of government, 10 of them, plus the representatives of the others, signed a 15-point declaration with 26 commitments. Within the framework of that declaration, there are various elements which promote the good use of the environment, such as promoting walking, additional physical exercise, proper nutrition, and so on. This is in addition to no tobacco, no alcohol, and so on. And so the heads, in fact, have issued since 2007, 8 years ago, this policy directive. In some instances, it has begun to translate in countries into concrete policies. You go to some countries, you will see that the government has constructed additional space within the urbanizations going on throughout the region to ensure that people have safe places to walk. Some of them are well lit so that the security issues are taken care of. And slowly there's a promotion of foods away from the manufactured fruits to a lot more fresh greens and vegetables. So they have done their part in terms of adhering to their declaration and meeting some of the prerequisites to ensure that there is some level of sustainable use of the environment. It's not just good enough to put in place housing and so on. If you don't have these prerequisites, then people won't be healthy. I should say that there's a clamor on behalf of some who are au fait with some of the policy requirements to push this a little further, to ensure that we begin to look and scrutinize policies which relate to sustainable transportation, and that is more use of public transportation, which will in fact facilitate a little more walking as people need to get to and from their homes to that public transportation, or to and fro from the engagements that they do on a daily basis, so that the tendency in the region for more and more personal transportation, meaning cars, if that is pursued steadfastly, we should have more and more mass transit, and therefore less degradation of the environment by more cars burning fossil fuels. All right? And certainly it will support NCD prevention because people will walk more, they'll keep their weight down, and they will certainly be healthier.
You have certainly addressed some of the environmental practices that are unsustainable and that increase the NCD risk factors, such as the cheap cars, traffic jams, and global warming, which cause exercise to be much more difficult. You also mentioned, in brief, commercialized foods, which lead to greater availability of ultra-processed foods. Could you comment on some of the other important issues the region needs to address to secure a healthy environment for this and future generation?
I think the problem which the world faces is that there are great disparities in consumption. A lot of the production of commercial food generates a lot of waste of raw food so that you get to that commercial food. And this, I guess, is viewed on the fact that in modern environments, it is even more difficult based on the activities which people engage in on a daily basis to find personal time to actually do their own food preparation. And so in our environments, the use of a lot of commercial food, whether it be indigenous recipes or international recipes, have become the norm. A lot of people don't cook at home anymore, and therefore the way in which that food needs to be prepared, in fact, challenges food security because, as I said, so much of it is lost. Certainly, we in the public health sector are doing our best to try to encourage people to use more and more of our natural foods instead of going in the direction of the fast foods and a lot of the commercial food, which is very often very fatty and very salty, and therefore encourages the onset of non-communicable diseases in people of mature age. But that's easier said than done. You yourself will know that it is easier and cheaper to access manufactured food than it is to access natural foods, because to get these from farm to market, the technology to keep them fresh and in a condition that you really can make best use of them in our environments is not perfect. And in fact, if you look at in our instances, the farm to market losses for fresh food is in fact considerable. And these are things that we need to work on if people are to eat healthier.
Okay. We have coming up in September NCD celebration, the Caribbean NCD celebration. Is there any new initiative that would be on the regional platform for the celebration?
Well, we have pretty much exposed all the things that I think in an operational sense we can do. Some of the other things, like promoting biking, require policy initiatives which will cost money. In a lot of developed countries, they have chiseled out on secondary roads biking paths so that people can actually cycle. In our environments, even along secondary roads, there's no safe walking path for pedestrians. In other words, if you were to increase physical exercise, for example, you really do need policy initiatives which will cost, and governments therefore will have to commit monies and policy efforts to ensure that the populations can in fact do these things safely. And that's been, part of the challenge, how to get governments to give consideration to not just building a road, because in many of our communities in this region, roads are maybe still not paved. Where that's the case, very often the government takes that route, which allows more people to have paved roads, which, yes, does encourage more cars and more motorized transportation. And they put less emphasis on ensuring that there are walking paths on these roads so people can have, some level of safety if they decide not to drive, but in fact to walk.
Okay. Dr. Cummins, thank you very much.
I just want to make one last comment before we go on. It's a political comment. The disparities in development in the world are going to challenge us in terms of sustainable consumption. And I say this because even though many of the poorest countries are beginning to acknowledge that they have problems with some of the problems that are already well entrenched here, like childhood obesity, there are still millions of children who go to sleep hungry. There are millions of children who are still around the world who are still suffering from protein energy malnutrition. And part of managing that gap is going to be increasing food production, which corrects that. They are the same foods, when overconsumed, produce childhood obesity, and nobody knows how to establish the middle ground so that people have food sufficiency, and on the other hand, they don't develop the kind of malnutrition where you become overweight, obese, etc. The policy issues surrounding that are many of the countries which are galloping towards establishment of their middle class, which usually is what reflects good living under consumption, are not at all willing to countenance that they should find ways to stem this consumption, which has already been established in the developed countries. And so the international political problem is going to be how to find median ground so that everybody is happy, because we are going to have some level of consumption. My personal view is you're not going to feed people with animal proteins in sufficient quantities unless there's some damage to the environment. But how to minimize this is going to be the problem, so that most people in the world, if they can afford it, can have some kind of meal of their choice and aspirations.
You've actually left us with that disparity, food for thought.
Yes.
And
I am not naive.
On
I am not naive, and every time we go to international conferences, our region, we're going to have to remember that what we take for granted, because we have proportionately a large middle class compared to many other countries. There are lots of countries that are now trying to establish that. And their consumption and what supports that consumption is what is actually damaging to the environment. I don't want to speak too much about the science, and so on. Things like when you have cows, how much methane you produce, and how that increases global warming and so on. But certainly that's a consideration we will need to have.
Okay, Dr. Cummins, thank you very much for your usual cooperation and insight.
Thank you.